You're listening to Olivia's Book Club, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club, a very special occasion because, we're always Zooming, but right now I have a guest, IRL, in real life, sitting just 2 feet away from me. It is the one and only Don Winslow, who really requires no official introduction. If you are a reader, you know about him, just ruling crime fiction, best-selling author, award-winning author, more books than we could ever name, 23 books, by the way. And it was last year when he was touring and promoting what was to be the end of an era, announcing his retirement and going out with a bang with an incredible trilogy. And part 2 is now out, City of Dreams, the follow-up to City on Fire. And it is an absolute page-turner. Don, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It is a jumping off from your revisiting of the classics, but it's also this trilogy, the stories that you said you had kind of waited your lifetime to tell because they're the truest, the closest to you, taking you back home really where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in Rhode Island in a little fishing town where the first book begins, and I left there when I was 17, Olivia, and spent decades wandering the earth, trying to become a writer, trying to make a living, trying to support my wife and my son. And then finally went back to Rhode Island, both physically. About 7 or 8 years ago, my wife and I started spending more time there to take care of my mom. And I fell in love with the place again. And although I started these books, believe it or not, 28 years ago, I finally sat down and finished them in Rhode Island.
They're classic stories, and it's all the tensions that, those of us who love fiction and drama, and, it's about honor and about reputation and, of course, money and sex and control and power and, the classic tensions between the Irish and the Italians and sort of arrangements that are made and sort of kind of peace treaties. It's the ultimate. And then when the simplest actions can blow up everything and send us on a trajectory of real devastation, which is kind of what starts to happen in book number 1. Yeah. And in book number 2, we're picking up where we left off. There has been a war, and what's next?
I think book number 2 starts 20 minutes after book number 1 ends. It just jumps right into it. Well, Danny Ryan, the protagonist of book number 1, has lost the war. So I guess if you haven't read book number 1, now you know. And he has to run. Yeah. And he has a senile father and an infant son because he's a widower now, his wife just having died. And he's fleeing the country and driving across America, running from the mob, the feds, the cops, a whole bunch of people, just to try to find a place to be and exist.
And the intensity of that is, you don't know. He has a sense that everybody is after him, and how to make a plan for what happens next and how to rebuild, and also how to repair the history that has formed him and pained him, the really disappointment of a father, the absence of a mother, and now the responsibility of doing better by his own son.
Yeah, it's in many ways a family story, and it's about this guy who has regrets and doesn't really know how to live in the world. But then now he has an infant child, that's silly, an infant boy. What does he do? How does he raise this kid with some sort of sense of connection and reality? And that fascinated me as a writer.
One of the most fascinating characters to me is his mother. And so she was not a part of his life for much of his life and has emerged in some key times through the course of the book 1 and book 2 when he has really needed a hand. However, he doesn't really want a hand from her.
Yeah, he resents it. You alluded to these books going back to the classics. When I was reading the Iliad and reading about the character Aeneas, who is Danny Ryan, Aphrodite, the goddess, literally comes out of the sky and rescues him in a battle. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that in contemporary fiction? It makes no sense. But I started to look up their backgrounds in mythology and learned that Aphrodite abandoned Aeneas as an infant, gave him to the father. And that was fascinating to me. So now you have this woman who shows up when he's 28 years old, wanting to be a mother, and he wants no part of it. But then in book 2, as he's traveling with this kid and trying to make a go of it, he realizes, yeah, maybe I need this help, and maybe we can reconnect.
Right. So it's just a fantastic story. You mentioned taking many, many years to sort of find your way as a writer, and I upon reading your biography previously, or just what you're the kind of person, it seems like you've lived about 17 lives, if not more, in your one lifetime. Will you give us some highlights of what you did prior to writing and becoming the Don Winslow best-selling author that contributed to Don Winslow, incredible storyteller, because every life experience that you've had, I imagine it helped you to formulate this career of yours.
Well, I was an overnight success in my 50s.
The way it always works, right?
Long night, But yeah, I needed to make a living, and so I did a bunch of different stuff. I was a private investigator in New York and later in California. So I was on Times Square before Mickey Mouse arrived there, back in the day. Worked as a PI in London and Amsterdam and California and various places. And then I became, believe it or not, a safari guide. People don't believe this, but I was a photographic safari guide in Kenya because my education's in African history, which made me a hardcore unemployable. Right.
Just the kind of education parents want their kids to get, right?
Absolutely.
It's definitely going to pay off right away.
Right. You leave college and you go be a PI in Times Square and then go chase leopards around in Africa and China. I spent a lot of time in China. Later on, I also started directing Shakespeare productions in Oxford, England, during the summer for international high school kids. I convinced them that I could direct Shakespeare and I did that job for, I think, 20 summers. So it was an odd kind of life, and sort of similar to Danny, I wasn't running from anybody, and my wife's very much alive, but the three of us, him as a baby, and we were traveling the world. We lived in hotels for 3 years while I was doing cases in California. And so we were always wandering and packing up, from California to England to Africa and back. So I know that feeling.
As a writer, you're, I assume, constantly pulling on these life experiences, pulling from, and also watching the world through, I would imagine, a very unique perspective of taking notes of behaviors and patterns and what people are about and what makes them tick and what troubles them. And so that has shaped your writing. What were the maybe most important parts of those experiences for you?
I think it was getting to know different cultures. Now, I never took notes. That would be a really bad idea.
As a PI and all of that, right?
And researching, drug cartels. It's a really bad idea to show up with a notepad. But yeah, can I take that down? But I think it was getting to know cultures and a certain kind of mindset. I spent a lot of time with criminals, let's be frank about it, and a lot of time with cops and lawyers and judges and crime reporters and those kind of people. So you got to know the jargon, but more really the mindset. And what I learned is that everyone has a story. This is the guiding belief behind my writing, is that every human being that you run into in the course of a day, if you bother to ask and if you bother to listen, has a story.
When you announced that you would be formally retiring, of course, there's still another book coming out with this trilogy. Right. So many of your books are being adapted for film and television right now. So it's hardly that Don Winslow will be disappearing. We know that you'll be putting your energies into politics and more of your activism. But what made you say, okay, I am willing to say this is going to be it? Is it that the satisfaction with this particular trilogy, that this is where you would want to tie a bow on this career?
It was a confluence of things. One was what was happening in my own life and my own career, and another is what's been happening in the country, frankly, which is a little polarizing. But I was looking around at what I feel is an existential moment in American democracy that's been going on now for years. And at the same time, finishing up this trilogy, knowing it was the work of my lifetime. And so those two streams coming together kind of inform that decision.
It's certainly a high note to be going out on, obviously, and we'll be able to be looking forward to book number 3 next year. The casting news that had just come out very recently about Austin Butler being in your lead role and bringing that to life. I mean, if people didn't know his work prior to him becoming Elvis, I mean, he literally became Elvis. I mean, that film was so fantastic, and his work in that movie. So I can't imagine a better selection to bring this character to life for you and to really be contributing to the evolution of this story, because this could be we would hope, 3 movies.
It's intended to be 3 movies. That's where we're headed. And yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled. I mean, obviously he's a terrific actor. Elvis was fantastic and it just blew me away. And he's a good guy. I like him, which is important. So we've had a bunch of conversations about the character and the story. I think he really gets it. He's passionate about it, so I couldn't be happier.
When these projects go Hollywood, and how hard is it to do that sort of handoff of your work and allow it to be somebody else's baby, and then you wait and see? And how much have you over the years then chosen to maybe change some of those dynamics so that you do have a little more say?
Yeah, when I was first in this business, and mind you, I think everything I've ever written has been either bought or optioned by movies over the years. I was pretty hands-off. Later in my career, when I got together with my now agent Shane Salerno, who's also an A-list screenwriter in his own right, began to take a more active role. I definitely want a seat at the table. Now I know I'm not naive. I know I'm not going to have the last word. I'm not going to be standing beside the director. I'm, in fact, rarely, if ever, on the set. But I do want to look at the scripts. I do want to give notes. I do want to talk about casting and all of that kind of thing, and be heard, and just have a voice at the table.
What is it like for you after such a remarkable, successful career? I mean, last year you said you went all over the world on a book tour. I mean, to know that that these readers do want to have this contact with you, and what impact your work has had on so many people everywhere. I mean, it must be just it just must still be pretty staggering.
Oh, it's absolutely staggering. It's humbling, and I'm always surprised. I'm always surprised. Listen, I've had so much bigger and better a career than I ever dreamed, and probably than I deserve. It's been amazing. So when I go out and I get that kind of response from people, it really is, and I'm sincere about this, it's humbling, that you've maybe made an impact here or there, or brightened somebody's life, or, gave them something interesting to read and to look at. That's what I've always wanted to do since I was a little kid. And so, it's pretty amazing.
What advice do you have to somebody who is a fan of your work and has a desire to break into this business, to tell stories, whether it is in books or for the screen, and just wants to be able to get in and dig at somebody's emotions and get yesterday I just keep laughing because my husband and I are both reading this. We were very fortunate to also have the soft arc, and we were outside and just kind of going back and forth, and it's just you're getting in people's minds and souls, and that's a really crazy thing. So if somebody dreams of somehow making that happen for themselves, what do you have to say to them? It seems so out of reach.
Basically 3 things. Okay, 1, writer's right. Before it's a noun, it's a verb. But I also I want people to be realistic. and say, everyone around January, right, says, I'm going to write my novel this year. No, you're not. Because you have a job, you have a family, you have other responsibilities. And so what I say to them is, don't say you're going to write a novel this year. Say you're going to write a page on Tuesday. Do the doable. Do you know what I mean? When I was trying to do this, I said, I'm going to write 5 pages a day no matter what. And I did. And it took me 3 years, but I had my first book. Now, the first 15 publishers didn't think so.
They're like, that's not a book.
That's not a book. No. But eventually somebody did, and that started my career. So what I try to tell aspiring writers is do the doable. Set a goal that's realistic, right? But then do it. Stick to it. Think about it. If you write a page a day, in about a year you have a book, right? As opposed to saying, I'm going to write this novel, and then you don't, and then you get discouraged and you get down on yourself. Do the doable. And the third thing I'd say is never give up. Never give up. Again, I was rejected, 15 times my first time out. We talked about T.J. Newman, who could tell these stories forever, right? Do not give up. If you do that, you write a page a day or 2 pages a day, whatever, and you struggle with, I guess it's the empty screen now, not the empty page, then you're a writer. You just are. You're my colleague. You're TJ's colleague. And don't ever let anyone take that away from you.
Do you take notes now as you are having thoughts or thinking of, or you wake up in the middle of the night and write something down, or...
No. I'm laughing because I think twice I've woken up in the middle of the night and jotted something down, and in the morning you look at it and it's literally gibberish.
It feels like genius in the moment, but it's just crap.
Like, an electric badger? What? I'm not sure. That's going to help.
Is this a grocery list
or
a
right? Lime jello. So no, I don't. I don't take a lot of notes, and I don't outline, because I want to be surprised. And I think if I'm surprised, the reader's going to be surprised. And I know myself well enough that if I did an outline like they taught me in 8th grade, like the nuns taught me, that I would stick to it slavishly. I would never deviate from it. And I, sometimes a character will do or say something that you didn't intend. Right? You're just typing, and then they do something goofy or say something goofy that really changes the story. And usually for the better. And so I want to stay open to those possibilities.
And I guess that's got to be that magical moment, because that just delights me when I hear writers say, "Oh, I didn't expect that to happen," or "I didn't expect that person to be a main character of the story," and all of a sudden they come in and they took my attention.
Yeah, you're referring to Danny's mother in this trilogy. That happened with her. I expected her to be a minor character. But I got liking her so much, and she started doing and saying things that I found interesting, that she's become a major character. So that's really fun when that happens, yeah.
And just little hints for our listeners as we move into this book, and we're moving away from the East Coast, because as you mentioned, he's looking for what he's going to be able to do next and where he's going to be safe and all of that. And we get to spend some time in some very fun places, and specifically Southern California and Las Vegas, which are just delicious for settings, right?
Oh my
for
gosh,
a writer.
Yeah. I wanted to bring Danny to Hollywood. In the Aeneid, Aeneas sees murals painted on a cave wall of his former life. And I thought, what's the modern equivalent of that? Well, it's pretty easy, really, film. And so the idea of bringing him to a film set where he meets the actor who's playing him and sees his old neighborhood recreated on a soundstage and meets an actress that he falls in love with, which is the worst possible person that either of them could choose to fall in love with at that time,
So good. Don, it is just delightful to have the opportunity to see you in person, to talk to you, and to read your work, most importantly, and be able to share it with friends who love digging into a good story. So do not miss this. It is the follow-up to City on Fire, City of Dreams. The novel is out now, and then in 24, it will be City in Ruins. City in Ruins. Oh,
Las Vegas.
Oh, gosh, now I'm even more stressed out. Wow. Okay, the trilogy, incredible. And Don, for those who will be here in Arizona meeting you at Poison Pen in Scottsdale, what an absolute treat. And thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. You can send us an email with your thoughts or your book recommendations. Olivia's Book Club at azfamily.com is the address. And you can check out Olivia's Book Club on Facebook or find us on Instagram. Hello, Bookstagrammers, at olivias.bookclub. And Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Amazon Music.
This is Olivia's Book Club, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.